Welcome back to Sprague Homestead. A growing trend has been that newer homesteaders and smaller farmers are bypassing the traditional tractor and buying a skid steer for their farms. Today we're going to talk about what are the advantages and disadvantages to either, and if either of them are going to be the right choice for your small homestead or farm. So to start with, let's start with talking about the skid steer. Now the model we have here currently is an S150 Bobcat brand skid steer. Alright, so I've got a list of all the specifications because there is a lot to these skid steers, probably more than you think. So let's start with that they are 11 feet long, they are 5.5 feet wide, they have a lift capability of 7.2 feet, they have a turning radius of 6.8 feet, they are 46 horsepower, they weigh just under 6,000 pounds, and they have a lift capacity of 1,500 pounds. Now for us, we have a used model here, so probably typically most new homesteaders or farmers are going to pick up a good used quality piece. Now these range roughly from $12,000 to $20,000 based on what I could find online. There's multiple sites in your area that can find them. One I looked at was machinerytrader.com that had it for the nationwide, and it seemed like the range was from about $12,000 to $20,000 for these in good shape, in good use condition. Now if you're going to bypass a used and go straight to a new item, this is going to be probably in the $30,000 range, brand new with 0 hours on it. Now the skid steer itself is pretty handy to use. Now you can see on it right now it has 4 wheels. You can actually get track kits for these that will do, like, I was thinking of it like little mini tanks. They have the treads on them versus the wheels, but they have a lot of attachments that are great for using them on a homestead. So I've got a huge list here. I'll kind of go through them because I was surprised when I did all the research on these how many actual attachments go on the front of these skid steers. So easily you can think of it, they're going to be used for a bucket. You can use the forks like we have here. They have a dozer blade or a snow blade, which is great. You can put a mini backhoe on the front, a bale spear for the kind of the big monster bales, the 6-footers. You can pick those up with these. You can do a brush mower, a sweeper, a concrete hopper, a filter, an auger, a tree shearer, a trencher, an electromagnet. Think of that. You can pick up scrap metal with these, with a big electromagnet. You can use a trencher, pallet forks, wood splitter, post or tree puller, a receiver hitch, a rock bucket, and a stump grinder. And one that was not on the list but came from the audience is a flat hay grapple, which is basically like a bunch of fingers to go out, pick up multiple bales at a time, and can set them on. Similar to what we have at our hay man, he loads up our trailer really quick because he can load up 6 bales at a time. Now the price range for all of that equipment is going to vary depending on what it is, if it's new or used, but just know typically the front mounted stuff is a little bit pricier of what I could find versus the rear PTO driven pieces on a tractor. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for new and used. You're probably going to spend a little bit more for the front mount hydraulic pieces because they're a little bit different setup than what you'd find for a tractor.
Okay, so the inside of a Bobcat's a little bit different than a tractor. So what we have up in the upper right hand corner is going to be your controls and your keys. These things turn and will tell you automatically over here, like you can see where it's glow. It's actually going into a glow plug countdown because this is of course a diesel. So it tells you when you do it, when it's done, it'll go back to your hour meter. And of course, then you would turn the key back to start. We're not going to do that. Back over here again, you've got all your controls. So you've got your temp, your gas, or your fuel. I'm bad about calling it gas even when it's diesel. Lights, all this kind of stuff. And what's a little bit different is once you've got it started, like in a tractor, you're pretty much in drive. If you push it into drive, you're pretty much driving. This thing will actually stay in kind of a safety mode until the seat bar, which I'll show in a second, has been dropped, and then you have to actually press to operate the loader. So I'll kind of back up here. You can kind of see this thing's got a seat bar, kind of like if you're, say on a roller coaster. So that is your security. Now you do have a seat belt if you need it. I know this thing's covered in snow, but what really makes these things different You can kind of see down here at my feet, there's two paddles here, and that actually controls your front end. That's going to be the thing that raises and lowers your bucket, and does that sort of thing. To drive these things, you actually have basically joysticks. So you have one that controls the left-hand side of the vehicle, one that controls the right-hand side. And that's part of why these things can turn in such an amazingly tight radius, is you can basically be pushing in two separate directions. You don't really want to do that because it tears the tires up pretty fast, but that's kind of what separates this from a tractor.
So now that we covered the skid steer, let's jump into a tractor. Now our tractor itself is a 40 horsepower model. It's a 2540L from Mahindra. Mahindra also makes larger tractors than that, so you can do a quick comparison between a 40 to a 45, which is the skid steer, and they also make a 45 horse. So you'd almost have a direct correlation between them, or a direct comparison between a 46 and a 45 horse. Now I looked at pricing on our tractor, what it is today. Even though we've owned this for 4 years, I got the 2019 pricing. So now these come new at about $24,000 and sell upwards of $30,000 depending on what you buy. We bought it with a bucket. We also got a separate attachment in the back. And these come as a four-wheel drive model. So we bought a four-wheel drive there. It is 6 foot wide. It has an 8.5 foot lift and can get a closed cab with heat and AC. You can see we bought extra just the canopy itself, just to keep off some of the weather, the sun and that in the summers. And we really like that. We've had tractors, or we've borrowed tractors without a canopy, and I gotta tell you, spend the money on the canopy if you're not gonna go for the enclosed cab. Now our Mahindra tractor itself has a 2,000 pound lift capacity from the pins, which is up here. It's a little bit different than how it lifts from the skid steer, but they're pretty equivalent on how much they can lift, even though the Mahindra has the planned capability of going higher and further out. It's still pretty equitable between them. Now the used model on this is going to be somewhere in the $19,000 to $25,000 range, depending on the quality of it and how well it's maintained and the age of it. Now some of the attachments on the front are universal. In the last 5 years, you're going to notice that if you get a newer tractor, most of the implements can be used between a skid steer or a tractor. The mounting itself is going to be kind of a universal. Anything from about 5 years and older, you're going to find that has something more specific to the brand you buy. So between our newer Mahindra and an older skid steer, the attachments on the front are going to be universal and they can swap pretty darn easy. So anything we can buy for the skid steer between a grader or a bucket or anything else has the capability going on our newer tractor. Some of the things you can get for your tractor that you won't for a skid steer are going to go on the back. Now on the back of your tractor, you're going to have a 3-point hitch. It's going to be a top and 2 sides, so it's going to form a triangle. Now the back of a tractor is going to be PTO driven typically, which is going to be simple to a drive shaft. On the back of a skid steer, there isn't any attachments back there. So the universal pieces that go on the back of your tractor for a 3-point are going to be dedicated to your 3-point tractor. So the things you can get for the back of your tractor is, like, one thing we have here is a grader. It does a great job dragging behind. It's got teeth that can go into the ground and rip it up and then grade it off. You can also put a bucket on here, a backhoe, a simple grader box blade, a baler and cutter that's going to be driven by your PTO. Now if you've watched our videos on hay equipment, that is all driven. It's being dragged behind or being pulled by the tractor but driven by the PTO. You can also get a manure spreader, which we're in the market for, and you can get a nice big brush mower that you can get up to, I think, about 6 or 8 feet in diameter. You can cut a lot of things down with those. Now some of the other things you've seen us get, we recently picked up, was a chipper, a spreader for seeds, and you can also get a disking equipment to be able to kind of dig up the earth a little bit that way. Now a lot of the equipment that you can get for the backside of your tractor on a 3-point mount are going to be universal, so they're typically not dedicated to the brand you buy. So anything you can pick up used typically will go on the back of your tractor, no problem.
So of course this is a shuttle shift tractor, which I'm sure Kanan will talk about in a minute, the differences. So what you've got is going to be a little more car-like, I guess. So you've got an ignition, This one also has a glow. It's a little different. On this tractor, if you turn it to on and it gives you the glow signal, then you turn it to glow and hold it. It doesn't have the nice countdown feature that it does on the Bobcat, where it pretty much handles it itself. On top of that, on this side, you've got lights, you've got your clutch, brake, gas, and then you've got your throttle control right here. So what's a little bit different with the Bobcat versus the tractor, with the Bobcat, you are constantly telling it what to do. If you let go of everything, it's off, right? It'll continue to run, but it's not going forward, it's not going back, it's not doing anything. With a tractor, with a shuttle shift, once you've got it in a gear and got a speed going in your forward or reverse, you can take your feet off of everything else and it's going to continue to go, because this throttle control is going to tell it what speed we're going. So it's a little bit different. Other controls in here, of course, I've got a bucket control. I used to have a nice knob. We kicked it off in the hayfield the first year, so this is the upgraded Bolt version. You've also got your PTO push control here. On the sides, you've got all kinds of stuff. So I've got the ability to raise and lower my PTO. I've got an entire range. I think this thing is a 12 speed, if I remember right. So I've got a low, medium, and a high range. And on top of that, I have a first, second, third, and fourth gear in each one of those ranges. So this tractor will go from basically a snail's crawl to, I think I saw online that it'll top out at like 25 or 30 miles an hour. Never had it going that fast. On the other side, so on this side, you've also got this knob here that puts the PTO either engaged or off. Of course, right now it's off. And then this little jewel down here is my four-wheel drive selector. So right now, of course, it's pulled up, four-wheel drive is engaged. And if I wanted to go ahead and take it out, I would just push it in. So a lot more knobs and buttons and things, but this tractor really does twice the things that the Bobcat does, only because on my tractor, I have operation of both ends, where with the skid steer, you're only really operating the front.
Okay, so knowing the capabilities between a skid steer and a tractor, the question is, are either of them going to be right for your homestead or your small farm? It's really going to kind of depend. You can see based on new and used values, based on what size of tractor you get, they're pretty equivalent on what you can buy for the right amount of money. Now with these, we do a lot with these, and typically anything that doesn't require something driven by a PTO, a lot of times we will grab the skid steer just because it's a smaller size. And if you can kind of see between my garage doors, both will fit in my garage, and these are 10-foot garage bays. Skid steer is obviously a little bit shorter. With the canopy on the tractor, it's obviously taller. Now if you took your canopy off, it's probably going to be a little bit shorter than even your skid steer. Width-wise, they will both fit in a standard garage door width, so kind of depends on how you're going to do it, or you may just have a dedicated equipment shed.
All right, so I get to do this part since I use them both the most. So since we're really talking about what is the best for your homestead, it's going to really come down to what you're doing. If you are primarily doing a lot of stuff where you're lifting or pushing or using, the bucket a lot, by far and away, the skid steer is probably going to be your better thing. If you're not going to grow hay or use a great big rototiller, do any disking or anything like that, then you really don't have much use for a tractor, right? If all you're really focused on is the front end and the bucket and that sort of capability, for your money, I would probably go with the skid steer. If you think you're going to do anything farming related with a PTO at any point, you're probably going to want a tractor. The bush hogs for these things, or the brush cutters, are way cheaper than these. You can do, of course, haying, field cutting. There's a lot of drags, discs, fence stretchers, all that kind of stuff that you can do with a tractor that you just can't do off the skid steer. I would say if you've got more than about 5 acres, the tractor probably in the long run is going to be the better purchase, just because it gives you more option all the way around. Now that we've talked about that, why don't we go ahead and talk about what is better as a woman to deal with. So between the two, I find the Bobcat a whole lot easier to drive, but then I'm 5'7". If you're much shorter than this, you might have trouble reaching the pedals. Now my mom is what, 5'3" at this point. She can drive the Bobcat, but sometimes to really get the bucket controls is really kind of, you know, scooting forward on the seat and really driving by her tiptoes. It's not always the best thing to be doing. They don't exactly have a way to move the seat forward. Now with the tractor, you can move the seat forward just a little bit, but because of the way that it drives, once I'm into gear and have selected my throttle range, I can slide back into the seat. So for me, I find that this is a lot easier to drive if I'm doing a lot of stuff, like when we're doing hay and that sort of thing, because I can just select what I'm doing, sit back and let the tractor do the work. Now for changing the implements, it's probably going to be about the same thing. PTO will go on fairly easily, as long as you don't have a lot of shifting to get it into the right position. But the front end stuff, when I have to change them, a lot of times I have to get Kanan to help. Just because of the way that they're spring compressed, and we'll show you in a second, but the way the handles pick up to let go, a lot of times, I mean, you don't want them to be easy, right? You don't want them to be too easy because you don't want your stuff coming off mid-use. But I do find that they're a little too difficult, at least for me, as a woman to do.
So that's it from Sprague Homestead. Are you looking for a skid steer or a tractor? That's going to be your choice. But that's it. We'll see you next time.